Okay, so today's topic is the BIM imperative. Let me just give you a quick rundown of what we're going to be going through today. First of all, we'll do a BIM primer, so to explain to you what BIM is all about. Then we'll look at some of the benefits of BIM for owners, and also covering that the benefits that design and construction companies can get. We'll look at the workflows and processes that perform that link between BIM and facilities management for owners, including what are called the government data drops. We'll look at the transfer of information from BIM to FM of space and assets and actually do a demonstration of how that can work. Then we'll do a brief summary, look at some of the next steps you might like to look at, and also handle your questions. Now before I go on, let me just highlight this web seminar is very much oriented towards its intended audience of building owners, operators, developers, facilities managers. But I'm very aware there are many architects, engineers and indeed construction companies also as delegates. Many of you will know what BIM is to you. Hopefully from this session you'll get to know better what BIM is to an owner. So let's start off with an introduction to building information modelling. When we consider a new build, or indeed any major renovation or extension, much focus goes on the design and the construction project, especially its timescales and costs. The developer, future owner, future operator, future occupier often tend to overlook the fact that what is being built in anything less than a year to a few years, depending on its size, will then be used for many decades. And while the design and construction costs may be significant, the operational costs over the life of that building will eventually dwarf these. So why is this important? Well, if the design and construction can be influenced to reduce the ongoing costs, then this has got to have significant longer-term advantages. It's this that drove the government's construction strategy, a plan to reduce costs by up to 20% by the end of the current Parliament. And part of this plan calls for the process of BIM by 2016. Already, the government has commenced pilot projects, which are reported to be producing even greater savings than this. And a key part of the government plan is the provision of data in electronic format to the owner, not just at the end of the project, but actually at each key stage. Now, I'm going to make various references to the government construction strategy, not because it's a requirement for anything outside of the public sector, but because it both indicates the importance of BIM and because many of the recommendations should be seriously considered and often taken advantage of for all projects, whether they're public sector or private sector. We all know there's a sequence of operations in the design, construction and management of a new project. And key to this sequence is the passing over of information from design to construction and from construction to management. The architects and engineers provide the design to the construction companies for them to enhance the design with construction details, to do construction planning, to purchase the raw materials and manufactured goods, and actually to build it. Then the construction company passes to the eventual owner the as-built information as part of the handover and commissioning process. And in an ideal world, this will include all the O&M information needed. The process of BIM should make all of this smoother and a much more efficient operation. But I'm aware we've not actually yet said what BIM is. There's a number of wordy definitions, of which this is just one. Building information modelling is the digital representation of physical and functional characteristics of a facility, creating a shared knowledge resource for information about it, forming a reliable basis for decisions during its life cycle, from earliest conception to demolition. So BIM has many things within it. It's a 3D model, it's a database, it's a digital representation of what may get built, it's an analysis tool, a digital representation of what was built, or a data set for you, the client that you've purchased. It's currently more accurate to say that BIM means many different things to different people at different times. But maybe you still don't know what it actually is.
In this section, we're going to look at some of the working examples of BIM to FM process in action and discuss the benefits. For this, we'll be using Revit and Archibus. Revit is Autodesk's core BIM platform used by architects, engineers and contractors. Archibus is the leading international CAFM solution used across the education, healthcare, corporate and government sectors. As Bob mentioned, depending on the detail of your BIM execution, your new building data may be supplied in a number of formats. This is likely to be a mixture of models, schedules, documents and databases. Assuming FM representation have been able to engage early in the BIM process, the FM standards and conventions for the classification of new data can be specified upfront and used throughout design and construction. These could include space ID formats, numbering conventions, asset numbering schemes, furniture and equipment standards, and space mapping classifications. If this isn't achieved, data can still be imported and either manipulated during the transfer process or once it has arrived into an FM system. This will obviously add to the workload and reduce the potential BIM benefits. In the demonstrations we're about to show, the graphical and non-graphical imports link share common space idents and assets and have been defined using existing FM standards. We'll go on to show new BIM data being used in an FM environment, in this case having planned maintenance carried out on it. The steps we will need to complete for our imported graphical data are as follows. Selecting a model, linking the model to the FM system, mapping fields from our BIM model to our FM system, identifying the areas which we want to bring into our FM system, and then cataloguing the elements. So here we see the demonstration of the process in action. Here we see the Revit tool being used to identify lease suite areas. And so these are areas which can be used in FM to manage lease and property details. Here the Revit tool is being used to split a particular floor plan in two, identifying two specific areas which could be leased out. At this stage, we're going to synchronize the database fields, and this defines the linkage between the BIM database fields and the FM system database fields. We then use a catalog tool from the FM system to capture the information within the BIM database, here adding primary key information which has been omitted, and then import that information into our FM system. We then go on to show how room information can be introduced as well, using a similar process. Obviously the mapping of database fields from BIM to FM is different for this, being a different asset type. And here we're selecting the room area information in BIM model and using the catalog tool to import it into our FM system. In this case, the room numbers have been defined, and so we've got no validation queries. To import non-graphical data into FM, the steps we'll need to complete are as follows. We need to identify the source data. In this case, we're going to be showing a COBE import, but it could be a spreadsheet or a similar schedule information. We need to configure some import tool to allow that data process to be complete. We're going to execute the tool and run it, which will import the assets, and then we're going to import the maintenance procedures, schedules, steps, as well as the parts, tools and trades needed to complete those maintenance activities, and then associate those and check the association with the assets we have in our system. So here we see our COBE spreadsheet containing the asset information that we want to import. Here we see Archibus's configuration of connectors, so the tool in which we're allowed to select our COBE spreadsheet and define the fields which we want to import into the Archibus database. And then we've run the tool and imported the assets, and here we're seeing them in Archibus's Smart Client view. Here we're back in our COBE spreadsheet looking at the data which defines the maintenance procedures associated with those assets. And so we see the procedures, we see the step details for those procedures, we see the dates with which those procedures are due to take place, as well as the frequency with which they need to take place, and the parts, tools and trades required to complete those activities. We're using the connector tool again, this time to import multiple feeds of data defined by the connectors. And this imports the information defined in COBE into the necessary tables within Archibus. We're now in Archibus checking those procedures have been imported, and we can see here a procedure with associated steps and trades has been imported into the system. We can now check that the procedures have been assigned to the assets which have also been imported. So here we can see for a particular door that it's got an associated procedure as well as associated to it. We can check the definition of those, the PM schedules required for that particular procedure. And we can see the data has been imported into the system here. Now the field validation step can be considered optional, as the benefits are varying depending on the quality and integration of the commissioning activities already conducted within the BIM processes. If this is to be carried out within the FM system, the process steps would include generating assessments from those assets, and then assigning those assessments out to field assessors to be confirmed. They would then validate the presence and condition of those assets out in the field and return the asset information back to the register, where it could be managed by the FM system, and any work or rectification of those issues can be carried out from the FM system. Moving on to the operational side of our process, this is the point which the information we've imported and validated from BIM can actually be used within our FM system to start managing our property and our assets. The steps we need to carry out to demonstrate that are as follows. We're going to generate some work orders against assets and rooms. We're going to issue those bits of work out to field engineers on a mobile device, who's going to capture the time and costs of that piece of work. Then we're going to complete the task on the mobile device and then update the task and return it to our supervisor. So here we see in Archibus the generation of planned maintenance work orders being carried out by a supervisor or a maintenance manager. The PM procedure here has been, generation procedure has been speeded up slightly. Here we can check the work orders which have been generated as part of that process. We can see a number of work orders have been generated with associated work requests, corresponding to the steps within that procedure. We can check for each of those work requests the trade requirements and part requirements for conducting that piece of engineering maintenance. We can then go on to issue the work to our field force. Here we're checking the details of an individual work request. Here we see the description of the work which has been defined, and here we can check the location of that work on a plan which has been generated from our BIM process as well. By selecting an individual request, we can then issue it out to our field force, who can then receive it on a mobile tablet. They can check the details of that work request. They can carry out the work according to those instructions. They can then report the hours which they've taken to complete the work. Then they can carry out an update to the job details so that everyone knows what was involved in carrying out the work. At this stage, the job status is updated, and the supervisor in charge will know that piece of work is being carried out. And so we've demonstrated our BIM to FM workflow. At this stage, with our new BIM building fully operational, FM managers can start collecting asset performance data that can shape the requirements for future projects identified here. A number of benefits we've demonstrated today can be expected. These represent the reduction in lengthy space mapping exercises and asset data collection. This saves time and money. We've got the automation of the collation process itself, which is improving the quality of data which arrives in our FM system. It enables earlier space reporting and planning, supporting day one asset management. This is a performance optimization opportunity. Finally, we've got the opportunity to improve future projects which we're carrying out, which is continuous improvement. So with that, we'll hand back to Bob for summary.
Thank you, John. Okay, so we're just coming up to the conclusion. We'll look at a brief summary and next steps and also your questions. So don't forget, if you've got a question, just type it into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. So we've looked at what BIM is. We've looked at the benefits to owners of BIM in the design and construction process, as well as why design and construction companies also have an interest in BIM. We've considered how and when owners should get involved, and look at some of the workflows to establish the requirements and the processes which enable BIM to FM transfer of space and assets. And as I say, and shortly we'll have a look at your questions. But first, I'd like to tackle two other topics. First of all, who pays for BIM? Any process change, especially one where more information is to be provided, has costs. Costs of introduction, costs of learning, and maybe costs of extra work needed. So there's an expectation that they will want to charge more. But contradicting this is the fact that once underway and skilled up, it should be more productive, producing fewer errors requiring correction, less waste in time and materials, more accurate costing, and risk reduction. So this should reduce the costs. You can see here a report produced by McGraw-Hill Construction looking at the return on investment that architects, engineers and construction companies were getting from investing in BIM. Now this goes back to 2010, and you can see the majority of people responding to the survey were actually showing that they were getting a positive return from that investment. So it actually demonstrates that BIM may cost more initially, but once underway, it provides significant savings. And another part of this same report actually demonstrates the more experienced people are, then the greater the returns on those investments. So ultimately, BIM should not cost more. There is, however, from the owner's perspective, the question of who pays for the handover of BIM data for FM. This, historically and in future, will actually depend on the project and what is agreed. But what's often overlooked in a new build project is the cost of surveying what has been built and the manual entry of this into the facilities management systems. This can have, as we've seen in projects, a significant cost and can take a considerable amount of time. BIM can significantly reduce this. So overall, BIM and this whole process should end up with something that is costing less. So in conclusion about BIM and FM, BIM is not just for design and construction. It can deliver most value for owners, developers, facilities managers and so on. And therefore they should be working with designers and their construction companies to understand what BIM can deliver for them and to actually specify it in what's called the employer's information requirements. Design and construction companies should use BIM to actually deliver extra value to the owners. And we should be considering the government's lead, but evaluate what's of relevance and what may not be to you and your particular project. So BIM and the process of moving information from BIM to FM is real, it is tangible, it's here, but it is of course evolving like anything that's involving technology. The other question I'll pose is why you should take advice from Excitec. Well, hopefully the overview we've provided today demonstrates some of our experience. But I'd emphasise that we're probably unique in the UK with consultants, solutions, software and services in design, construction and management. and computer-aided design and data management systems and computer-aided facilities management. We also, of course, have customers in all these areas and have taken and continue to take a leading part in many major projects in these areas. So what might your next steps be? Well, if BIM or FM and BIM is of interest to you, I'd certainly recommend further reading. And we've summarised a few places here on this slide, and we have a special page on our website that will provide a link to you for. Going through these, there's some exciting resources on the left, such as white papers and articles. And on the right-hand side, there are some government resources where we're providing links to government websites and other resources like the Construction Industry Council documents that I mentioned earlier on. But I'd also, of course, suggest you contact us to discuss your particular needs so we can see how we might be able to advise and support you. Okay, so now we'll move on to questions and answers. So we've got at the moment 3 questions. Just to remind you, if you want to type things in, you can do it through the question box on the right-hand side. What we're going to do is I will read out the question, and then if I think I know the answer, I'll give it. If not, I'll ask John if he does. And if neither of us know, what we'll do is promise to come back to you later on. Okay, so let's tackle the first one. First one is, why not wait to see the process of PAS 1192.3? I think on the previous slide I mentioned PAS, which is a publicly agreed standard published by BSI on BIM and the processes in it. There is a third revision of that document available for those of you not aware of it, I think at the beginning of next year, which is going to extend the processes that are proposed there into the FM stage in more detail. So yes, you could wait until that comes out, but of course you may have a project that you want to kick off now. It may well be the processes there might be appropriate for some projects and not others. So yes, that's an option, but we would suggest you don't just wait for that. The next question is, do you think COBie is now a firm standard, or is it likely to evolve? Okay, so COBie, as it was originally presented, was very much as I described it, so an Excel spreadsheet with defined tabs, defined fields, and the idea was that you would either export information into that Excel format from your design software or construction software. You might manually then populate extra information and then transfer it on. I think one of the problems that we have all seen with COBie is the massive amount of data that needs to be in there. We were involved in one of the government pilot schemes with one of the major construction companies, and there were literally hundreds of thousands of rows of information that were going into the COBie spreadsheet. So I think everybody recognises that for any project above a certain size, Excel is not really the way to do it. You are much better off with some form of database. And there are indeed companies and systems that now will take a COBie type format and store it as a database. And I think that's probably what we're going to see in the future, that the COBie definitions will move from what is seen as being an independent format, something that's very easy to grasp like Excel, into something that's SQL or Oracle or whatever, but the fields will stay the same. I think as well, there are discussions at the moment about the way that COBie relates to IFCs, which is another way of describing objects within the design and construction model. So yes, I think it's definitely going to evolve, there's no question about that. I think it will evolve in terms of giving more and more detail, and evolve in terms of making it more structured and more easy to use, but maybe not quite so recognisable, because everybody knows how to operate on an Excel spreadsheet, not everybody knows how to work with SQL or whatever. Next question is, can you see information agencies becoming the default to support and manage projects throughout the building life cycle? That's an interesting thought. Information agencies, so I presume the idea here would be, I suppose, like the information manager that we talked about, who is given the role of managing information through the project, and actually becoming a service. It's an interesting idea. I suppose it is something which, in a way, we've already got involved in, where we are effectively, well, let's say a year or 2 years ago, we would have been called a BIM manager in a project. Increasingly, I think we're being talked about as being the information manager. So I suppose actually Excitec might be sort of an information agency in terms of supporting that process. Okay, next question is, we are committed to using BIM from 2016 for a new build. We are assured the BIM, Revit, Archibus client and AutoCAD AFM client can work hand in hand, but have you any cases of this? I think that both of the links between Revit and Archibus that we demonstrated are fairly new, so I don't think any of them, certainly in terms of projects that we've been involved with, have actually gone live, if you like. What we're doing is demonstrating new software that has come out. So I don't think there's any case studies we could provide you, but certainly we'd be happy to work with you and perhaps test it in a particular way you would want to use it and make sure that that is okay. Okay, next question is, what is the current BIM implementation for residentials market in the UK? And how would residentials building owners benefit from BIM and FM implementation? Okay, residential property is an interesting one for BIM because you might think, well, if I'm designing a 10-storey tower block, or office building I should say, then BIM is going to be very useful because there is so much repeated information within there. Applying it to home design and construction is a little bit different. And you might say, well, each one is going to be different, therefore it's not going to work. In fact, that's not the case, because you can use it very effectively in that environment. But of course, if you're doing homes, then FM is not really applicable, but of course it would be if you have large residential accommodation. I'm not aware of projects which are doing that, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. So I think probably we'll come back and let you know if we can find any. Right, what have you found the most convincing method to illustrate the benefits of BIM to sceptical clients, particularly dealing with additional upfront costs? Okay, this is an interesting one. I think there is a view within design and construction that clients don't know that they want BIM or what BIM is. In fact, we had a conference back in July where a number of delegates there were asking us actually to do a sort of educational exercise for clients to demonstrate the importance of BIM. There are clients, there's no doubt about it, who are very into BIM, and we're working with quite a few of those organisations. I think there's a number of ways of demonstrating the importance of BIM to sceptical clients. One might be for us to list some of the organisations we're working with and some of the projects that we're working on. I think the other way is to demonstrate some of the cost savings that are achievable through that, and to actually quiz them about how much money they would be spending in the population of their FM systems with information, and then saying, well, can we find a better way to actually assist you in doing that? And BIM will probably be the way to do that. Okay, next one. If there is a suggested evolution of COBE, does this not cause problems as a system being able to exchange information? We need to be more customised than out of the box.
Yeah, so I think we demonstrated during today that the process for that needs to be flexible anyway, because the import of information is dynamic, and so for however the coding might change or might be used differently, your FM system needs to be able to handle that, and it needs to be able to be flexible enough to do that. Most good FM systems can do that. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, next question is there going to be part of the standardised JCT contracts? I can't remember about JCT contracts. I know there are contracts that are much more BIM focused, and I mentioned what has come across in the US, which is the integrated project delivery process. But I'll have to refer that to some of our other consultants who are much more involved in that. So we'll come back to you on that as to what those actually are. Okay, next one is, and actually there's two parts to this question, which I think John's going to answer, so I'll read them out and then John can answer them. Do you find the COVID jobs sheet is flexible and detailed enough for managing a planned preventative regime creation? And in practice, are you finding anyone actually completing this detail rather than using an FM regime manager? John?
Yeah, there are a number of challenges there. PPM is quite complex in how it can be delivered, and so requires quite a lot of information. And I don't think Kobe is ever going to be a perfect fit for that. And so you need to be flexible in how the information's imported. But also, there's always going to be, from the FM side, a blend of how new PPM procedures are going to be introduced versus the existing PPM procedures for existing assets across that particular organisation. And so while we've demonstrated the import of PPM procedures, the assigning of those to individual assets is always going to be more or less prescriptive. It's going to be more on an asset-by-asset basis.
Okay, thanks John. Okay, we are just coming up to 1 o'clock, so I think we'll tackle a couple more questions. If more come in after that, then we will come back to you and discuss them individually, but we're sort of very concerned not to overrun what time you may have allocated to this. So the next one is, can Excitec support the integration of BIM with non-Archibus FM systems? Yes, I mean, yes, we on the slide showed Archibus as being one of the CAFM solutions we provide. We have another one ourselves which is called FX Space, and although we don't resell other vendors' FM software, we quite often work in projects where lots of different other software applications are used, and that happens to be design, construction and management. We can't profess to provide every single piece of software that is needed in a project. So yes, we can, and we have experience in some areas. John and I were talking earlier this morning about Maximo, which is a very powerful and quite common asset management system. So yes, there are other areas. Of course, one of the questions that has to be asked is, of the other vendors, what import or export methods they can support, what APIs, database connections and so on they can do. But yes, we're not going to say, if you don't use Archibus, we're not going to talk to you. Okay, and I think we'll take this as the last question. Have you come across a new project which is now implementing Reba Workstage 2013? Has it been a useful overlay for BIM, or the changes is complicated to implement the BIM process? Right, so the Reba Workstage 2013, I assume, was the change at the beginning of this year in terms of the naming and the addition of terminology in terms of the way that BIM would be used. And of course it's gone beyond the Reba, the Royal Institute of British Architects area of work. It's actually now, I think, issued by the Construction Industry Council with the Reba. I'm not aware, maybe again our consultants sort of more generally might be, I'm not aware of any companies that have sort of specifically said that is what we're doing, but in terms of the guidance, I think certainly the feedback we've had is that it is very useful, because it is setting out the starting point for what should be done at each stage. And I think one of the things about BIM is that it does actually change when you do things. I think I mentioned earlier on that quite often you're moving some of the design decisions to much earlier in the process, because that gives you the ability, for example, to test things like turning the building a few degrees to see whether it affects the solar heat gains and so on. So yes, there's no doubt I think it is a useful overlay. I'm sure people are using it. But of course you need to go into a much greater level of detail in terms of what you actually do within each individual project. Okay, I think we'll draw a close there. Thank you very much all for attending. We hope that this has been useful to you. You should now see on your screen that same list of resources that we had before. And towards the bottom you'll see a link there, which we will email out as well, but there's a link there, excitec.co.uk/BIM for owners, with the 4 being a number. On that web page there are links for those particular documents you can see above, either to the individual PDF documents or to those websites. If you'd like further information, if you want to comment on what we provided today, or maybe what we've not covered, any feedback, please email me, bob.garrett@excitec.co.uk. So thank you very much for participating. Thank you.